Board. And good evening, everybody. Okay. Before we begin, I just want to kind of a little point of business. I am going to send out a poll in the group next day or two, maybe. We'll see. Um, as I'm going through the topic of Chassidut, it is an endless sea of information. I'm not going to talk about every single, what's called chatzer, like the courtyard of every single uh, form of Chassidut, but there's really a lot still to explore. One thing I learned a long time ago in teaching, and it's true about speaking, it's true about a lot of things, leave them wanting more. I don't want to overplay the whole topic Chassidut. And some people might say, no, keep going. There's more to do. I have at least one more after tonight, as far as my notes, but I could probably do three or four more. So if it's something as a topic, where you want to start to veer away from, it's fine. If you want to stay with this for a little bit longer, also fine. I'm not looking for answers now. Try not to stay awake all night trying to think up what you want to respond, but I will send Bezrat Hashem a poll soon. Okay. One of the now what we left off was we talked about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder, of Chassidut. Let's call him like the father of Chassidut, spiritual father of Chassidut. You'll see why I'm saying that in a few minutes. The Vilna Gaon, who was the main force behind the Mitnagdim, those who opposed Chassidut. We talked about the little bit about biographies of both. We talked about the approach to Chassidut from Baal Shem Tov. We talked about the Vilna Gaon's objections in depth. We talked about his life a little bit. Where we left off was I mentioned the name of the man Dov Ber of Mezrich, known as the Maggid of Mezrich, who will become not only the main student of the Baal Shem Tov, but will basically become the one who puts into practice the whole movement of Chassidut. But I want to try something first. When a person learns Chassidut, in very general terms, whether it's Chabad or Karlin Stolin or Ger, whatever it might be, there's a topic not a topic, there's a format that repeats itself called a ma'amar, or also known in Chassidut as a mimer. Mem Aleph Mem Resh. A mimer. What's a mimer? So it very often will start with a pasuk, and the pasuk is X, and will then go into some cases very long dissertations leading up to some background and information which seem to have nothing to do with pasuk and take you on a journey into Chassidut. And at the end of the mimer, it then ties everything together. It's very classic. I'm learning right now with someone online, like I did Tanya, the Igeret HaKodesh from the Alter Rebbe. And it's very, very much like that. Letter number 6 right now. The last three, I think 4, 5, and 6, or 3, 4, 5, and 6 numbers of the Igerot, the letters, the topic is tzedakah. He starts with literally part of a pasuk, and it's like 60 pages long, 40 pages long. It's fascinating, but some people love it and some people can't stand that type of learning. Again, it's to each his own, but I'm going to do not a whole mamar. Don't worry. I want to just give you like a little taste. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the screen a pasuk that I believe you probably all know. Let me just bring it up here. Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. I will set God in front of me at all times. You will find this pasuk very often at the front of the shul, the Chazan's amud, where he stands. Sometimes you'll see it on the parochet, on the curtain in front of the Aron Kodesh. Sometimes you'll see it, and someone will write that. There's certain sidurim. I've seen it in number Sardi sidurim at the very top of every single page. Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. I will set Hashem in front of me at all times. And this mamar, this mimer, is going to deal with this particular subject. And what I want to do is I'm going to leave this pasuk in front of you here while I just begin a little bit about it, and then we're going to look at the second slide, and we're going to contrast two things. You'll see. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. The Baal Shem Tov interprets. So first of all, what does this mean? It means that at all times I kind of have to consider God being in front of me. Be aware of it. When my kids were growing up, they went to the same school that I went to many, many, many years before. And the man who, for the most part, was the principal, was still the principal. He was an absolute legend, fantastic principal. And I used to say to them, his name was Rabbi Shapiro. I said, if Rabbi Shapiro were at the table, would you do that? No, 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 no. So like, Lahavdil, if God's watching, that's the idea in a sense. Like you have to have that awareness, and that can go in so many different directions. But right now, I'm going to focus on two approaches right now. Baal Shem Tov does not use that sentence, that pasuk, as just a directive, a tzivui, for yirat shamayim, just for becoming in fear of God. Or I say fear, also in awe, but it's much greater than the usual understanding. Let's take a look at what the usual understanding is. I'm going to explain this. This is from the very, very, very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, or Chaim, the first siman. So it's basically chapter 1, section 1. After the Shulchan Aruch says that a person should wake up in the morning like an Ari, like a lion, and to do the bidding of God, then the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserles, whom we have learned about, makes the following comment. I'll read and explain, and then we'll go back to the Chassidut approach and see what their approach is. Says first is that the Shulchan Aruch said, get up early, get up to daven. You should be the one that wakes up the dawn. He says, okay, if you're not going to get up at the crack of dawn, just don't get up too late. Make sure you can time your davening to daven b'tzibur. Shiviti Hashem l'negdi tamid hu klal gadol b'Torah. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And move you all over. Okay. Shiviti Hashem l'negdi tamid hu klal gadol b'Torah. The concept of setting God in front of me at all times is a major general rule of Torah. U'va'alot tzadikim asher lochim l'fnei Elokim. And also one of the praises, not really, but I don't know what the right word is even in English, for tzaddikim who always want to go before God. A person's actions and movements and things they do when he's alone at home is not comparable. It's not comparable to how you would act in front of a great king. Maybe some of you had the opportunity to be in the presence of somebody, whether it's a head of state or a governor or city hall or whatever, some official who's up there. You wouldn't do or act the same way you would when you're alone in your home. Nor would you just say what's on your mind. I might mumble out loud here in the house sometimes about something, and I would never say it to someone's face or say it to someone who's like a great individual. Unlike you speak to your family, it's very different how you're going to speak in front of a king. How much more so? When you pay attention that the great king, i.e. God, that the entire universe is filled with his glory. Omed alav, standing on him or by him. And Hashem always sees what's going on. It says, a person should always be, as the Moreh Nevuchim says, as the Rambam, should be in fear and in awe and humility before God at all times. A person shouldn't be embarrassed in front of other people who may make fun of him. You will do a mitzvah. Someone might make fun of you. Classic examples I've given, I've heard with kids, especially teens. What are you benching for? It's not Shabbat. Also, when you're alone, when you're lying in your bed, understand before not just whom you're standing, but even before whom you're lying down. When a person wakes up, he should get up quickly to serve the exalted God. Okay. That's the normative approach to the pasuk Shiviti Hashem v'negdi tamid. What is the approach, or is the approach of the Baal Shem Tov and his followers? The Baal Shem Tov sees this pasuk as existential awareness of Hashem, where the perception of reality is transformed by the constant presence of God. Now, in normal English, what does that mean? Every moment, in every action, even mundane ones, we realize that we're standing before God, and not only that we're standing there, but that nothing else exists besides Hashem. supervising the world. What does that even mean? We're going to see in a moment that it's not just an awareness of God's presence, that Hashem is in everything that we see and every action that we could take. If we are going to exercise, if we are going to eat, if we are going to sleep, we are going to watch the sunrise, going to whatever it might be, when we do it, l'shem shamayim, we do it because we want to be healthy, we want to serve Hashem. God is in that as well. It's ein the pasuk in Zot HaBracha, ein od milvado. There's nothing besides God. What does that mean? We're going to see in a moment. But this is kind of a radical existential move. Before Chassidut, the common approach to this pasuk and this common approach to this idea was Hashem created the world and Hashem rules over it. And we have to be in awareness of his presence at all times. The Baal Shem Tov, however, took also some of the Kabbalistic ideas of the Arizal, whom we learned about, and he took it a step further. Existence itself is godliness. Creation is not a separate reality from Hashem, but it's a continuous emanation. What does that mean? Here's what this is really the cool aspect in normal English. Trees, stones, people, your thoughts are all expressions of what's known in Chassidut as Elokus or Elokut, divinity, and that the meaning of the pasuk Shiviti Hashem L'nagdi Tamid is this constant awareness of the presence that Hashem is in everything, that the avodah of serving Hashem is b'chol drachecha, in absolutely every way. Like I said, even the mundane ways, eating, sleeping, working, taking a stroll, reading, they can all be transformed into something divine if they're done with the proper kavanah, the proper intention. Where do you see this for some people? Before they eat something on Shabbat, say the Kavod Shabbat, or the Kavod Shabbos, Shabbos Kodesh, that they're doing for Kavod of Shabbat, before davening, before certain tefillot, before certain mitzvot. There's the Hineni Muchanum Zuman. Here I am ready to prepare to do what I need to do. I want to read you a quote I came across. When a Jew eats with the awareness that the energy in the food is divine light, and he elevates that energy through a blessing and proper use, it is as holy as a prayer. Meaning, if I have an apple, I mumble a bracha through it and I eat, and I don't think anything about it, there's very little holiness about that. I'm not allowed to eat the apple without the bracha, but there's not much holiness. But when I stop and I actually think, I'm making a bracha, thanking Hashem that without him I couldn't have had this apple, and it's going to keep me healthy, as opposed to the cheesecake and cake and cookies and candy bars and whatever else the list is, ice cream, of course. Then it's having an effect on my neshama as well. I'm actually ingesting now something holy. Now, what did that do for the average Jew? Remember, we're talking to shtetl. We're not talking, some big yeshiva somewhere in Poland. We're talking to shtetl. It showed that you didn't have to be some massive Torah scholar to connect to Hashem. You didn't have to be a tzaddik to connect to Hashem. You had to be mindful of Hashem's presence, not just Hashem's always there and watching and listening and everything, but he can be part of absolutely everything you do. That is the approach in Chassidut. Now, I'm sure there are ma'amarim that go on that topic, dozens and maybe more dozens of pages. But I wanted to let I want to kind of just give you a little touch of what it is. So it took a pasuk. It showed what is the general approach. It then showed what is the Hasidic approach. But it's obviously much deeper than that. I just want to kind of just drop a little bit in there. In addition, within the same mamar or minor, in addition to that, there is another pasuk that says the following. Let me say, I think I have this on another slide. Let me just double check. Yeah, here it is. Le'olam Hashem Devarcha Nitzav Bashamayim. What does that mean in English? So it means, let me move you guys back if you block it here, over here, that forever Hashem, your word stands firm in heaven. It's another pasuk. What does the Maggid Mezrich do with that particular pasuk? Again, following this topic of Shiviti Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, what does he do with this? That forever Hashem, your word stands firm in the heavens. So the Maggid explains, we're going to talk about who he was in a couple of minutes. He says, following the thought of the Baal Shem Tov, this pasuk teaches us that this world exists only because Hashem's speech is constantly bringing it back into existence. What does that mean? He says that the words "L'olam Hashem v'achanitzav b'shamayim," that your word is always steadfast in the heavens, means that the letters or the words "Yehi rakia," let there be a firmament, "Yehi or," let there be light, "Yehi mayim," whatever. Every single thing that Hashem said in the beginning of creation is constantly being repeated in the heavens, perpetually, that causes the perpetual standing and active in the heavens. And it's not a metaphor, but it's actually reality. What is this? What is the Maggid Mezrich telling us? That this particular pasuk means that the only reason that the heavens still exist, the earth still exists, that the universe exists, that you exist and I exist and light and everything else is that the Hashem's Asara Ma'amarot, the 10 utterances in Breshit, where Hashem brings the world into creation, they're constantly being restated. And that if it were without Hashem's restating them, they would cease to exist. This is a much broader idea than everything exists only because Hashem wants it to exist. But this is even a step further, much step further, that Hashem is constantly re-uttering these words to enable things to exist. Now, interestingly enough, one more point in this topic is Maimer of Chassidut. There's a concept of what's known as Ayin and Yesh. Ayin means nothingness. Yesh means somethingness. There's no such word, I know. It's also referred to as Yeshus or Yeshut, as opposed to Yeshu, which is a little bit, that's Yashki is Jesus. But what does it mean? Those terms, I'm not going to get into them now, but we learned in Tanya together, when you've learned anything in Chassidut, you will come across those terms all the time. Ayin, nothingness. Yesh, somethingness. Those two topics, those almost have the yin-yang ideas, is very much a central portion in Chassidut. From our perspective, this world is yesh. There's yeshut. It exists. We can see it, can feel it, can touch. And Hashem is ayin. There's nothing there. There's nothing visible. We can't hear him. We can't see him, at least not directly. Unknowable. But from Hashem's perspective, Hashem is the only real yesh. Hashem is the only real thing that exists. And that everything else in this world, in this universe, is ayin. Because it has no independent substance. What does that mean? Because with Hashem we're to stop saying Yehi Rakia, Yehi Or, Yehi this, Yehi that, it wouldn't exist. So it only exists because Hashem is constantly recreating. And therefore, from Hashem's perspective, he's the Yesh and we're the Ayin. From our perspective, we're the Yesh, and Hashem's the Ayin, not that God forbid he doesn't exist, but that we can't see, we can't feel, we can't touch. So what happens with that perspective that Hashem is the Yesh and we're the Ayin, with an Aleph, by the way, not with an Ayin. With an Ayin means an I. When a person realizes that his I, his ego, his id, is not real, and it's all godliness, everything was infused with godliness. Again, we're talking from the perspective of Chassidut. He's able then to transcend his ego, connect to Hashem better through what's called bitul, or nullification. Again, these are terminologies we learned and talked about during when we were learning Tanya a while back. But these are topics that are constantly showing up in almost every form of Chassidut you can find. So let's kind of backtrack a little bit now. Let's talk about the Maggid of Mezrich. Who was he? When did he live? Legitimately, we can say that you've learned you can say that you cannot learn the history of Chassidut without knowing who he was. The Baal Shem Tov laid the framework. He laid the foundation. He wrote nothing. There's nothing in writing of the Baal Shem Tov himself wrote. Along came a man who was already known as the Maggid of Mezrich. He was a person who would go from village to village, shtetl to shtetl, telling stories and bringing people closer to God. Whether he was associated with Hasidic movement yet, not associated with any Hasidic movement. We're talking the infancy of Chassidut still. He was born in 1704 in Podolia. Basically, he's most of what we're talking about is Ukraine, whether it was the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mezerich. He was originally associated pretty much though with the non-Hasidic, I guess you can call it the elite, rabbinic elite. He was already known as a Talmudic scholar. He had already been practicing learning Kabbalah, and he was very influenced by the Ramak. We talked about Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, a student of the Arizal. So he was very much into that. And one day, I guess it wasn't just out of the blue, he got sick. And he had heard about the Baal Shem Tov, who had some form of healing powers. He decided to go, even though he didn't necessarily believe that the Baal Shem Tov had the power to do anything for him. After a period of time, as he learned Baal Shem Tov's teachings, and he found himself being drawn closer and closer and closer, not only did he become a disciple, we discussed last week that between a student and a disciple. Student is I have students, people come to me, they learn, and they go home. Disciple is someone who almost worships at the foot of the teacher, tries to take on the teachings, wants to watch the action of the teacher to try and absorb everything they can. I can Baruch Hashem say I don't have any of those. So he not only was he became a disciple, he became a central figure in the movement of Chassidut. I'm going to use a mashal or parable that just popped in my head. I don't think it's correct, but I'm going to use it anyways. The Baal Shem Tov is the following. He's the box you brought home from IKEA. It has all the parts, the framework, the instructions, everything you need to do, and no, there's not a single screw or bolt that's extra. It's all needed. But you need someone to put it together. And the problem is that some people don't know how to read instructions because they don't have any words. So then you have this person who's going to explain to you how to infuse this box with the holiness of a cabinet. And I'm going to put it together. And then they will all stand in awe and go, ooh, do it again. I'll do more of those. So lahavdil, I don't think the Baal Shem Tov would like to be compared to IKEA, but it's what I got right now. Sorry. The encounter between the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezerich, remember, Maggid of Mezerich was not just some fly-by-night. He was already a big guy by the time they meet, was probably one of the major vectors in Judaism in the past 500 years, because it gave us this new vector, it's not a branch, I don't know what the right word is even, a new approach, a new path to God, that's still within the framework of what we call religious Judaism, whatever that means, but with a very different approach. This focus, now someone I'm going to say will sound a little repetitive to what we talked about originally about the Baal Shem Tov himself, but we have to understand that now this is being promulgated and spread and taught greatly by the Maggid of Mezerich, the Ber of Mezerich. It focused a lot on joy, dveikut, the idea of clinging to God, the inner life of every Jew, and again, not just the elite. This is one of the things we have to remember, that Chassidut, one of the reasons probably it spread as quickly as it did, was it didn't appeal just to the elite and the upper crust, the people who knew how to open a Gemara, who knew already how to read the Shulchan Aruch. It appealed to everybody, to the masses. After the Baal Shem Tov died in 1760, there were those who expected the movement to disintegrate. Lahavdil, after the last Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away in 86 or whatever year, I don't remember when it was exactly, there were those who felt that it was the end of Chabad, that it was going to implode. God forbid. I say God forbid because it's a phenomenal movement when you take out some of the shtuyot. So the same thing would happen after the Baal Shem Tov died. But Dov Ber of Mezerich emerged as the de facto leader, uh, the one who carried the torch. He's settled in Mezerich, long term now, which again is in modern day Ukraine. And he started to have a circle of disciples around him too. That circle of disciples became known as the Chevraya Kadisha, not the Chevra Kadisha, which of course is the burial society. Chevraya Kadisha, Holy Brotherhood. It included some people who you will be shocked to understand that they were basically around the same time. But I'm going to stop here for a second and just kind of explain what I was about to say. On Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av, there is within Kinot or in the Musaf of Yom Kippur, there's something about what's called the Asar Harugei Malchut, the 10 martyrs. We have 10 people who were martyred, and many people thought there was like one after the other after the other. But we're talking over a period of a couple hundred years that this was, maybe a little bit less. So it's not all at one time. When you start to realize that it was over a period of time, it changes the perspective a little bit. We tend to mush, like imagine, he probably lived in the 3rd century. Imagine someone talks about us 500 years ago. Oh, he's probably somewhere in the 20th century. Well, dude, give me some timeline here. So when we start to understand that there are some great, great individuals whose names I'm going to tell you in a moment that were all around the same time, and they were his disciples. So you're talking, there was the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid Mezrich, and now all these associated individuals who will then found their own Hasidic movements. Some of the names you're going to know and some maybe not. Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk, Reb Zusha of Anapoli. What is Reb Zusha known? What is probably his most famous statement, or not a statement, made about him, is that his master came in one day and sees Reb Zusha crying. And he said, what's wrong? He says, I've been living with you and learning from you for so many years, and after I die, I'm going to go before God. He's going to say to me, why weren't you like your Rebbe? The Rebbe said to him, no, he's not going to say that. He's going to say, Zusha, why weren't you like Zusha? It's probably the most famous story about him, which means we have to live up to our own potential. Parentheses. Rav Yosef Dov Levi Soloveitchik, known as the Rav, looked at the beginning of Sefer Breshit. I hope I quote this right because it just popped into my head now. He looked at the beginning of Sefer Breshit and the difficult words of Na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmuteinu, let us fashion man in our form and in our image. What does that even mean? Why is it not in singular? Rashi gives his answer. For centuries, there are scholars who have given their answers, and Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveitchik is a wonderful answer. Brilliant. He needs my haskala. In the Shemaim, he said, there is the ideal me. There's the Zev Shandalov in the Shemaim, what I should aspire to, what I can become. And then he called it, there's this lump of clay on earth that will become this individual, in this case, Adam HaRishon. He says to the lump of clay, this is how the Rav explains it. He says to the lump of the clay, Na'aseh, let you and me together, let me help you, says Hashem, to become the image I have in the heavens of what you can become. It's a powerful idea. And this is, in a sense, what the story about Reb Zusha is about, that we have a potential that we have to try to live up to. And it's not a potential, we sometimes think, I know this is a history class, but I got to insert a little bit of thought here because you're talking Chassidut, how do you not do something about Jewish thought? We sometimes think that we set the bar a little high for ourselves and we're never going to really. So I had one person tell me, said they make a to-do list every day for the next day. It starts off like this: wake up and open eyes, get off bed, go to bathroom, wash netilat yadayim, put on clothes. Like it goes like about 25 things before they've even walked out the door that are just normal things we do. He says, by the time I get to Minyan in the morning, I already checked off 25 things I can do. So I'm really living up to my potential today. I'm really knocking these things off my to-do list. And that's obviously ridiculous, but we have to set ourselves goals. People are used to setting themselves goals early in life. I want to do this so I can get a degree. I want to get a job in this thing so that I can make money. And then after that, I'm going to try and build on that. I want to get married. I want to have children. I want to have grandchildren. I want to be, and we set goals, whether we do it consciously, subconsciously, but they're goals. And then some people get to a certain point in their life and they say, okay, I'm going to coast. A few years ago, I gave a talk. It was called "There's No Such Thing as Spiritual Retirement." And it focused a lot on Moshe Rabbeinu, who at 80 years old basically began his career. Um, so I think one of the important messages within this idea of what the story of Reb Zusha, this constant quote from Rabbi Yosef Dov Levi Soloveitchik, is that we always need to strive. There's this ideal in the Shemayim that we need to look and try to emulate. We're not going to necessarily get there, but you're not allowed to not try. You have to work at it. So let's go back to our list. We said Rabbi Melech of Lozhensk. These are circles, are the cadre of disciples who are at the feet, almost literally, of Dov Ber of Mezerich, Melech of Lozhensk, Rav Zusha of Anapoli, Rabbi Yitzchak of Barditchev. Here, story after story after story of Rabbi Yitzchak, Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, Rav Shneur Zalman of Li Adi. If you learned Tanya with me, you heard that name 1,000 times. If you don't recognize it, he was the founder of Chabad, known as the Alter Rebbe, known as the Admor HaZaken, known as the Baal HaTanya. He has many, many monikers. We're going to talk about him. We need to hear about his background as well soon. Rav Shmelka of Nikolsburg, Rav Aaron of Karlin, they're the Karlin Stolen Hasidim. There are so many different subsets and so many different factions that to go through all of them, you're talking a year of classes just on that, which don't worry, I'm not going to do that, but I do want to pick a few out if it's something the group wants to have. But it's really from the small town of Mezerich that Rav Dov Ber orchestrates a true spiritual revolution. And I use that word again on purpose. Remember the time period we're talking about. American Revolution, French Revolution are about to happen, the Hasidic Revolution, the failed Messianic Revolution of the two failed false messiahs. So this is a spiritual revolution, which we started with the Baal Shem Tov, but is really taking off with Dov Ber of Mezerich. It starts, for the most part, in Eastern Europe. It spreads teachings, it becomes inspirational, and establishes what are known as Hasidic courts. It's a term used in Hebrew is called Chatzer. Again, the Chatzer is like a courtyard. It's used sometimes, you'll hear it in English also, the Hasidic courtyard. It doesn't literally mean necessarily that in front of the person's house is a courtyard. Could be, but it refers to his, also there's another word used, it's a lot of Yiddish in this, obviously, klois, his home, his headquarters, for lack of a better term. There's a lot, within Chassidut itself, there is its own terminology that one, if you ever do really get into Chassidut, the person would really need to learn the nomenclature of Chassidut. What was it that he taught? What is it that Dov Ber taught? What did he do differently than Baal Shem Tov? So again, the Baal Shem Tov did almost zero written material, almost nothing. The Maggid's teachings, he also didn't really publish per se at first, but what happened was that they were recorded. What he wrote, what he said was recorded. I don't mean recorded on, obviously not voice recording. It was written down, was recorded, and was very sophisticated, and people would compile, and students eventually compiled into various works. Some of you will have heard of Magid Dvarav Yaakov, Likutei Amarim Tanya, that's Tanya, of course, of the first Lubavitcher. He's not called the first Lubavitcher, the founder of Chabad, Toldot Yaakov Yosef, all kinds of other ideas. But within all these different printings or different ideas and the different courtyards of Chassidut, the bottom or basic ideas were shared across the board, and then different sects within Chassidut focused more on certain aspects. When we're done talking about these various groups, I have a slide I came across that I thought was really cool. I talk about the different groups and what did they focus on? What was their focus in growth? So the things that stayed pretty much across the board, and then eventually add to this arsenal with very specific things. Concept of dveikut, again, that's the idea which we talked about, the clinging to God and seeing God in everything, and not just that, but everything can be elevated to religious experience. Bitul hayesh, nullification of our ego, Um, the metaphysical significance of speech and thought and intention. I'll come back to that in 1 second. And something unique to the Hasidic world, the redemptive power of a tzaddik's presence, the idea of being in the presence of a tzaddik. What does this mean, the idea, metaphysical significance of speech, thought, and intention? So I'm just going to mention one idea and what Tanya says about it. And for some of you are aware of this and some maybe not. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard the expression that machashava tova, a good intention or good thought, kadosh baruch hu mitzdarfa l'maaseh. Hashem makes it into as if it happened. What does that mean? So most people think like this. It means, and it's true, according to some opinions, that if I wake up in the morning, I say, you know what, today I'm going to go to yeshiva. I'm going to sit down and learn Gemara for 2 hours. That's my absolute 100% plan. And then I get a phone call from somebody who said, listen, I really need your help. Okay, there goes the learning in the yeshiva. As far as the idea of machashavat tova, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzdarfa l'maaseh, it's as if I did it. That's one approach. In Tanya, again, by the Admor HaZaken, Balatanya, the Alter Rebbe, he says it in a very different way. He says that's how most people approach it. He has a different approach. And what is it? It is almost impossible, he said, for people to always have the right intention when they do a mitzvah. Almost impossible. We're human beings. But especially if you look in Sfaradi Sidurim, in the Nusach Hari Sidurim, before almost every bracha you're making as far as a mitzvah, like tefillin, candle lighting, hafrashat challah, talit, all these things, you're going to see a little paragraph before it, the equivalent of hineni muchanum zuman, or something of that nature. I'm getting ready to do this, and I want it to be considered as if I had all the proper kavanot, even though I may not. The Balatanya says, when you say that, if I'm about to put on my tefillin in the morning, and I stop for a moment and think, and I really try to do this, and I think for a second, I'm not going to have I know I'm not going to have every single intention meant when I put on tefillin, but I really want to. That, Hashem says, according to Balatanya, that machashavat tova, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzdarfa, he connects it to the mitzvah. This machashavat tova, he connects it to the mitzvah, and he uses it as if the whole mitzvah was done in the best way possible, and so to speak, flies up to Shemayim on wings. And he uses that term exactly, Godfi. I'm not going to go into that because it would take too long. So these ideas are promulgated and taught by the Maggid Mezerich, and he's then teaching his students these ideas. He passed away in 1772. Again, put that in perspective. That's just before the American Revolution, the independence of America from England. He's buried in Anapoli, Ukraine. He left no dynastic successor. His legacy was ideology, it was spiritual, which to this day, any person who's learning Chassidut, whether they're Chabad or Karlin Stolen or whatever, Tolos Aaron, any of them, can all trace their legacy of knowledge straight back to Rav Dov Ber of Mezerich, who learned it all from the Baal Shem Tov. The Chevraya Kadisha, again, his students, went on to found their own schools of thought in Chassidut. And here I'm just giving you like a taste of the 1, 2, 3, I have four or five different ones and what they focused on. Notice everyone had these basic ideas, the fundamental, the Veikut and Bitul Hayesh and all that. But what do they also focus on? So Chabad is the intellectual mysticism. When you learn Tanya, you see that there's a mix of everything. Everything is, and yes, there's a mystical level to it as well. Karlin Stolen Hasidim, they're very much into the emotional aspect of fervent tefillah, of prayer. Lezhensk, Rubshitz, they're a little different. They're much into miracle working, social uplift. Again, it doesn't leave behind any of the other fundamental building blocks. Berdichev, love of Israel, very much about Ahavat Yisrael and the connection with the love of Hashem, love of Am Yisrael. This is why I say that we can say that even the Baal Shem Tov is the founder of Chassidut, who began the whole history of Chassidut, the architect, the one who put it into motion, who is the Kabbalan in a sense, using that terminology, who brought a unification to the teaching, we can trace that back to the Maggid of Mezrich. That puts him, as far as I personally am concerned, in the unique position of being responsible for every single branch of Chassidut today, not everything that they are, what they hold, not everything that their approach is. He may, if Dov Ber would come back right now, he may look at one group of Chassidut and say, look, all these building blocks are great, that she really is doing that, but what the heck is this? I don't know. I have no idea, obviously. But with all of them, you can find a lot of similarity. So it's what makes each one different is why there's so many different branches. You know, one's going to focus on tefillah, one's going to focus on spirituality, one's going to focus on dveikut. Each one has its own approach. Bezrat Hashem, next week, we'll talk a little bit about Reb Shneur Zalman Liadi, the first or the founder of Chabad Chassidut. Talk a little bit about that. And like I said, I'm going to send out a poll the studio audience and see where we're going to go. If we're going to continue after next week, or we're going to move into other areas of that time period. We will have, besides Chassidut, there's a lot happening in the mitnagdim, or is there a word, mitnagdeic world. I just made up a word, maybe. Among the misnagdim, a lot of other stuff going on. We'll hear about a very famous fight, almost not physical, but it was a huge split in the misnagdim world between two great rabbis over one little thing. And it wasn't just a minor issue. It was a massive issue. So there's a lot of other stuff to cover, but again, I'll ask your opinion on that. Meantime, wish everyone a good evening, and let's hear some Besorot Tovot, because you had
Thank you very much.
Besorot for those. Right. Yes, thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight.